Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, July 8th, 2025. We're back live once again. I realized that there was at least one rerun during the interim here, I guess on Friday. Did we run that? I don't remember. And, yeah, and I, of course, was listening to it and getting it set for reuse for Friday and listening to myself saying, hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's live today. And I think it might also have been a Friday. I don't really remember, but it was very confusing. But anyway, I think it was probably set right pretty quickly as it became, although it must have been confusing thinking, well, Donald Trump is president during this one, and he's president now, as incredible as that seems. But, yeah, well, he was president before, you know. And anyway, I just decided that since it was July 4th and the previous year's show around the early July period, not a great time in American political history. So we went all the way back so that we would at least be able to have a few laughs here and there, watching or remembering Trump's foibles with his first attempt at a military parade for July 4th. Way back when. All right. Well, anyway, we're back and live and on and only slightly confused today. Sounds like I'm going to check we'll see how the sound quality comes out today and whether the engineers flag anything today. I feel like there's a little bit of a buzz going on here, but it might just be me and in my head. I'm very disoriented at having been away for just a few days. It's very easy it's like when the kids, back in the days when I was sending the kids off to school in the morning and there was a vacation, and then getting back into the routine after a week or 2 weeks, as sometimes was the case, especially during snow day / vacation, extended vacations. You just forget your routine, and I've mostly forgotten that. So we'll see whether everything works. I was trying to make sure everything was in place, and it took me right up until the few seconds before the microphone went on to figure out, I don't really have everything put away. Anyway, lots of things happened, things to catch up on. We got all day to do it. This Friday, I am working with Ian Reifowitz to arrange his return as his latest book nears publication. He wanted to let me know that was happening. And it would be a good idea, I think, to preview that publication. And we got to, work out the details. We have new systems to work on now. The last time, he hasn't called since what we used to use? The Skype days. And now we're on Zoom, so it's totally different. I think it's going to be pretty easy to work it out. But we got to hammer out the details. He's available. I just have to figure out the timing and how we'll introduce him onto the show. I don't know whether he needs a fanfare or not. We'll have to go looking. And I got a couple in pocket that I could be using. More suggestions still rolling in from those of you listening, and I'm enjoying having that as a way of mixing that in. And, by the way, might as well take care of this bit of housekeeping while I've got everybody. I'm just writing everybody's name out. Everybody. It's a big number. 2 big new subscribers, supporters coming in through Patreon. And they're so new in some cases, I haven't even had a chance to write them down on the little colored index card that I keep by my desk to remind myself, hey, you should be thanking your contributors. And usually they sit there for 2 or 3 weeks, as I say. Isn't that nice to have this bright bit of color here? Now, I wonder what that says. Well, I haven't even written them all down yet, but let's see. On July 4th, in celebration of American independence, we welcomed Michael William Levine as a new Patreon supporter. We appreciate it, as always. And I wanted to thank you and welcome you on board. And I was just getting set to do that. I was going to. I really was. I had a note to myself and everything. I saw it while I was away, and my colored bits of paper were not immediately available. But I'm now reminded of it because I see another one has popped up. Laura Kay. Although Laura Kay feels to me like, I don't know, have we heard comments from you before? Or Did you used to be a supporter on a different platform, or am I just confused? It could be any one of a number of options. But also joining us on Patreon. Thank you very much to Laura and to Michael for joining us. And to all those who have come before and are still there, and we appreciate it. And it's time to start thinking about ways of ramping up the operations these days. These are scary times, and jobs are less than stable than they used to be anyway, way back in the day, like, last week. So what can you do? You want to try and build some sort of infrastructure for yourself heading into the future to pay for defense lawyers when the Gestapo rounds you up. You know how it is. All right. Like I said, there's plenty happening. We'll just kind of have to dive in and see how much of it makes it to our eyes. I don't know if it's going to be a article reading kind of a day or, hey, did you hear about the one where, and of course, mostly you will have heard about them. Not from me because I was away, but from your other various news inputs. Okay, so I don't know where to begin with this one. This one we don't really have to tell much of the story, really. I think we're all on the same page in this one. The so-called Epstein files. Everyone has, I'm sure by now, they've dragged out all of the videotape on this stuff and various news sources during the past couple of months when trying to appease the MAGA fan base. Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, Trump himself, various other people all insisted, oh yeah, we're the most transparent administration ever. We're going to publish the Epstein files. And I mean, long story short on that one, you've seen it by now. I said it on Blue Sky. It's also this morning on Daily Kos, the Clay Jones cartoon is top front and center on the front page is exactly the same approach. And I mean, how else could you approach it? But of course, it's just that much funnier with fun illustrations like Clay's. So, the way he puts it is, here's Pam Bondi standing there with the Epstein client list. I'm going to publish the Epstein client list, she says, very serious looking with gigantic lips, of course. And then reading the Epstein client list and eyes popping. Of course, you know who's there. There's the photo of Trump and Epstein together, hanging out, partying in my very own private disco room with my high-class disco friends at Pervalago. And then her conclusion, oops, there is no Epstein client list. That's basically it. We're gonna reveal the whole files, then read the files, and then not only are they not going to release them, there never were any. And, there's all sorts of hair splitting that can be done. People are saying, well, they're saying client list. There was no client list. That allows Bondi to say that and be somewhat truthful because there might not be a list of clients, but there's a list of contacts, and it was very different. The whole time the case has been in the public eye, it's been generally acknowledged that there was some sort of essentially little black book where Jeffrey Epstein kept the names and phone numbers and contact information for the important people he was cultivating for whatever reason. And it was, I don't know, I suppose it was never 100% clear that all the people in that book were also partaking of sexual favors through his trafficking network. But they were, and for the most part, they were probably just financial and power contacts, things he could use, I guess, in furtherance of his sex trafficking lifestyle. If I get in trouble, I can call on these government types, whether or not they're participating in the trafficking. And then, of course, he also was big into funding university research for furtherance of his own importance. And I think also mostly everything seemed to revolve around building the kind of credibility that he would be able to manipulate his government-related supporters into covering up his crimes or allowing him to get away with them. But he may have thought of it differently, but who cares? Anyway, there was also the question of whether or not his death was a suicide or a murder. And I did see that somebody put it on social media, and I can probably scroll back and tell you who did it too if I'm willing to do enough scrolling. Anyway, somebody says, I never really believed that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered until just now when I saw them say, yeah, there were no Epstein files after all. So there they are. And it's been really something watching them go through this, especially, of course, as people have pointed out, Pam Bondi was quoted as saying that, the Epstein files are on my desk right now for review, and there too. Well, the files or the client list, you could try to parse it that way, but really, what's the point? I don't think there's anybody in America who, A, didn't believe that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein had that kind of a relationship, even though they may or may not have had a falling out later on. There's nobody, I don't think, that believes that he wasn't in any of those files and that the decision wasn't driven by the unwillingness to reveal that finally, once and for all. So, okay. Let's see. Here's Empty Wheel, of course, will be parsing it to death and beyond, saying that there's one other, I guess she's got a list of discrepancies between what Pam Bondi is saying about it now and what she has said about it in the past. That could probably occupy the whole show. This particular one just says that Pam Bondi's past statements and what was said overnight, the discrepancy is that Bondi had said that there were 250 victims, but the new memo says there are thousands. Or at least 1,000 of them there were 1,000 plus victims, I guess we'll say it that way. Rather than just read what Marcy said, I'll flub it in this particular way. It's a horrific cover-up, and I guess we probably all knew from the moment the stories started breaking, maybe the first time he was arrested way back when, early, well before the Trump political era, it was kind of clear, this is just not the kind of guy they're going to do anything about. Sorry. Except possibly murder him to cover it up. All right, well, no matter how he died in prison, he did die in prison. So there's that, I suppose. And like I said, it's been kind of wild the whole time just watching them squirm about this. We read the story not that long ago about how uncomfortable Dan Bongino was about having promised that he was going to reveal all, and then trying to square that with MAGA supporters and Trump supporters, etc., his own podcast supporters, by saying, now I've had a chance to actually look over the files myself and review them, and guess what? All the people that I was saying were covering things up were really actually innocent of having covered them up, or I'm now guilty, as they are, of covering those things up. And I don't know, they haven't been able to, I guess, square that circle. Is that supposed to be how we use that phrasing? Let's see what other things that have happened include Elon Musk announcing that he was starting his own political party again. I don't think he's started any political parties before, but another billionaire who says, I can do it better and different, and I'm going to start my own political party to prove it. Of course, if you're old enough, it's shades of Ross Perot, and it's laughable and funny. Of course, I don't know, Elon Musk has taken things farther than, way farther than Ross Perot ever did. He gained control of some of the most important levers of government in the last couple of months, then got kicked out, then had a falling out with Trump. I don't know what's going to come of that. But he's clearly gotten a taste for authority, I guess, and decision-making, even if it's not particularly good or organized decision-making. So I assume he thinks that he will ride this party to victory somehow. It has the same problem every third party has, plus some other ones of his own making. And of course, the promise being, we're going to be different. We're going to do things differently. We're not Democrats. We're not Republicans. We're totally different. Of course, he walked right into something saying, we've tried the red party. We've tried the blue party. now it's time for something else. And of course, people pointing at the flag and saying, well, that's where the red and blue seem to come from. What's left? What's the third color that we're talking about? It's the white party. Yeah, well, probably so. But again, suffers from the same conceit. The idea that, well, for instance, I guess we could start by saying the purpose of Elon Musk starting a political party, even in his own mind, I think, is, and probably among most of his supporters, would be to elect Elon Musk president of the United States somehow, or someone he anoints if he can't get past the prohibition against foreign-born presidents. But, Constitution. Pff. Anyway, we can certainly deal with that when the time comes. And anyway, whether it's to elect him president or elect someone he appoints as president and make him president in the de facto president, and someone else the de jure president, perhaps. One almost never happens. People have tried it before. Even skilled politicians, even popular skilled politicians who have been president before have tried and failed with that. It's not got a great track record. Plus, of course, well, I guess I would say prior to this administration, it used to be important to also have a working majority in Congress. I don't know if that's important anymore. Maybe it won't matter in the future. Maybe we won't revert to that. I don't know. But one of the classic weaknesses of the third party idea was you're going to have to launch a successful presidential campaign as against everybody else, and also populate Congress with members of your party, or I suppose members of other parties who are willing to say, to hell with my party, I'll go with yours, which is possible, but then subjects you to the objection that you're just a remake of one of the other two parties, which you will be because, as I point out all the time, the structure of voting in Congress, there are, I guess, ways to structure things differently, although I don't know how you're going to end up making decisions effectively, efficiently, and with dispatch, but it's Congress, so who cares? But basically everything comes down to a yes-no vote eventually of some kind, and there are two parties. I've always theorized that it coalesces around two parties for us because the questions are yes-no. And we formulate them that way from the very beginning, and it's all about leveraging the yes and no votes against the other side. It's still yes-no voting in multi-party systems as well, but the approach to framing the question is very different than it is for our system. And of course, the balance of power is such that the people who get to frame the questions and bring the questions to the floor can fluctuate based on your support among your coalition, and that's just not the way it is in our system. The keys are handed over, and so they frame everything as yes, no, and they do so in order to score points against the opposition as much as to create any policy. So anyway, it ends up being a yes or no question, and there are, you can have a multiplicity of parties even in our system. There already are multiple different ways to arrive at a yes vote or a no vote, right? We've pointed that out a number of times. Greg used to illustrate it all the time in the healthcare context. X number of people are opposed to the Affordable Care Act. Now, some percentage of them are opposed to any kind of federal intervention in the health care coverage market, and others of them are enthusiastic in the extreme about that intervention and just don't think the Affordable Care Act went far enough. Lots of different reasons to vote no. Or, I think it's fine, but it needs a public option, and that's so serious a defect that I will withhold my vote, at least initially, in an attempt to force a public option into the mix. Things like that. Any number of reasons for getting to a yes or no, but it does come down to yes or no. And he's chosen to call it the America Party, as it turns out, because America, right? What else are you going to call it? And anyway, if there were America Party representatives in Congress, they would, of course, find themselves intentionally or otherwise, aligned with one side or another and end up looking an awful lot like one side or another. And there would be perhaps defections between parties, probably not as between the old Democratic and Republican parties, but I guess the plan is to have those defections between one or both of those parties and the America Party. But if the personnel are the same, for one thing, what kind of changes that? And if the choices are largely the same, what kind of changes that? We would have to say probably about none. But, there's always the option these days, since no law or logic applies, instead of voting yes or no, maybe the America Party will be voting Ness or Yo. A little bit of both, which is, of course, supposedly, the problem with the two-party system right from the beginning is there's just one big uniparty. They pretend to be two different parties, but we're going to strike a balance between the two parties that aren't even two parties. All right, whatever. I don't even know what your theory is anymore, but that doesn't appear to be, likely to happen. I'd noticed that people were passing around screenshots of the FEC filing to formally declare that there is such an organization as the America Party. And as usual, Elon Musk has, according to the paperwork, handed off all the paperwork to someone else. And I don't remember who that person is, except that I remember what job they hold. I will go back and fish the guy's name out of my references over the last couple of days to the stories that were popping up. But as I looked him up, I Googled the guy's name, and who knows, maybe they made it up because it was AI answer. But he's the CFO of Tesla, which is kind of amazing at this point. I mean, it seems like my first reaction was, naturally, he would get somebody who already works for him to do more work for him, essentially probably for free. He may or may not eventually pay him if the party actually launches, but until it launches, he's probably not paying him for this work. It's just paperwork. Why do I have to pay you? Paper. You don't have to sweat. Here it is. Vaibhav Taneja, I don't know, Teneja, appears to be Indian American according to the descriptions provided. So I don't know how you would pronounce Teneja, although, I don't know. But he's the CFO of Tesla. So he said, you be the treasurer of the America Party. You be the registered agent of the America Party, etc. And you take care of filing all the paperwork to turn us into a quote-unquote real party. And I guess I'm kind of amazed that he thought, again, I'm going to tap the structure, tap and tax, essentially, the structure of my one successful company and stretch it again, eventually to the breaking point, in service of my political desires, whatever they may be. And two, I guess I'm also sort of curious. It's not that hard to believe that there are still a handful of top Tesla executives who have become enormously rich because of their association with Elon Musk and Tesla in particular, and who are still happy with their lot in life. But I kind of was amazed that, like, the CFO of Tesla, he's not at this point like mad with Elon. You've kind of destroyed the value of our shares, and most of my wealth is probably tied up in that. I don't know. Maybe he's liquidated enough shares and put enough money away and diversified that he's taken care of. Or maybe he's just had so much money thrown at him over the years that he's just going to do whatever Elon asks. Or, I'm looking for an exit, and then he asked me, and if I refuse, I'm going to be tossed out before I've been able to fix my glide path out of here. I don't know what the explanation is, but I'm just surprised that there are still top-level Tesla executives who are like, oh yeah, I should get involved in another Elon project. Well, he's gotten involved, so there you have it. I should mention, I was sort of surprised by this one too. Back on the Epstein, because none of you people are giving up on the Epstein thing either. That's my feed is still full of that. But I saw somebody, the Tennessee Holler, and their Blue Sky account pointing out one of the other rather amazing things about the Epstein developments. Some screenshots, past and present, about the situation. Let's see. What's the first screenshot here? Is it the Independent? Is that the UK Independent or something else? The headline being Trump's biggest MAGA fans seen holding, quote, phase 1 of the Epstein files, but it's still secret from the public and Congress. This was a story back in late February about, as the subheader reads, a group of conservative influencers who were given access to a binder of the Epstein files, quote-unquote Epstein files, before members of Congress or the public. And I don't know who the hell most of these people are, but let's see. This picture includes, I don't know. Well, I guess a wider angle picture here includes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 plus of these conservative influencers, including Chayarachik, Libs of TikTok, and then a couple of others, Rogan O'Handley, who I never heard of, and I think is maybe this dandy here in the is this would you call it a double-breasted vest? There's 2 lines of buttons on his vest. Holy cow. So it's Edward VIII or 7th, or possibly Rogan O'Handley, known as DC Drano, I guess, online. Mike Cernovich, whose horrific name we've heard bandied about in the past, and a couple other people that I never heard of. And they're all holding up this binder of this exclusive access to the Epstein files, which, of course, as it turns out now, we learn from the Department of Justice, there are no Epstein files after all. So what's in the binder? I don't know. Actually, at the time, most people said this is actually information that's been publicly available for a long time, even these influencers. I'm just surprised. And for all the time people have spent telling me that Chayarachik was a real operator and really knew what was going on and could really manipulate people, she's been played, along with all of them, as a total chump in this. What a bunch of idiots. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Hey, I should warn you, let's see, well, among the many things that will probably go wrong later on today, during our latest breakaway from the microphone and in the extreme heat, we had set up a sprinkler system to try to take care of things and keep the plants watered on the back deck while we were away, and they're still programmed. And it now occurs to me that that means the sprinkler is programmed to go off for 10 minutes at 10 o'clock, which is during the show, which you will undoubtedly hear as the water patters against the windows. So that should be a fun and exciting development. I think we can probably get that thing reprogrammed probably before tomorrow, so it probably won't interrupt everything all week long. And anyway, as I'm reviewing everything and thinking there's so many stories that we might never get around to what's in pocket. Well, some of the things I wanted to share are in pocket, of course, or at least reminders of them, even if we don't read the entire article. And today's the last day that I can add anything to pocket. I got to have a new read it later system lined up by tomorrow, or we're going to be in trouble. We're going to run out of stories. However, I can read those pocket stories all the way up until, I think, October 8th. But I have some time to download that collection and do what with it? I don't know. Sit on it like I do with all data until the computer breaks and we throw it out. And then we save the hard drive for a couple of years thinking we'll recover that data, and then we don't do that. Perhaps you're in the same situation. All right, another item that happened while we were away, of course, the devastating flash floods in Texas and the very weird variety of reactions we've had to it. Everyone, I think by now, has been annoyed, angered, victimized, insulted enough times over weather-related events, which Republicans and MAGA types, teabag types, what we used to call Tea Party, teabagger types, remember that, immediately jump on and say, well, this befell XYZ city because of pick your hatred, right? And, well, the menu was usually pretty limited. The gays, something like that, essentially. New Orleans had a hurricane because it's the gayest city in America. Oh, it's not? Okay. Well, they have a lot of decorations, and I don't know. What's that supposed to mean? I have no idea. But, yeah, San Francisco had an earthquake because. New Orleans got a hurricane because. Anyone else got a hurricane, earthquake, fire, you name it. It's always somebody else's fault. Then, of course, something like this would happen. And people would, point out, not necessarily because they really believe that a red area or whatever, an area in a red state, which may or not be, as red as the rest of the state, or may not involve people who deserve any of the blame for what happened in that red state. Whatever, it happens, and I'll say this, we understand intellectually that we shouldn't be blaming people or rejoicing in any of it, but it's also, we have to understand it's hard not to reflect that anger back at people and say, or at the very least say, how come there's nobody out there among the televangelist community telling us what it means that flash floods would strike in central Texas? And the answer is, those people aren't telling the truth about anything. They're hypocrites and liars and opportunists. They're not gonna, don't look for them to make any sense. And you're not even going to be able to impose your sense of sense on them either. They're never going to admit, oh yeah, that was hypocritical of me anyway. So, on the one hand, you don't have to spend any time on that. On the other hand, you also maybe a few reminders to people like, okay, well, we're not supposed to indulge in this, but by the same token, you got to understand what people are dealing with emotionally. After years and years and years of being battered with this stuff, I can understand why you do it. But, and I also know that eventually all of you who say things that are, initially out of line, and it's too bad that happens, but that's what happens in the wake of every tragedy, will eventually come around to saying, okay, well, I don't mean that the kids have done anything wrong. And I don't even necessarily mean that I don't know anything about the parents. I'm just saying that it's odd and weird that, you might say it's odd and weird that our national media feel willing to carry the absurd accusations of televangelists and Tea Party and MAGA types when it comes to a disaster in a blue area, but are tutting when it comes to, don't start with this nonsense when there's a disaster in a red area. Anyway, there is this disaster, and there are plenty of other things that we can point to that are related to it that I think are certainly in the fair game territory. For instance, somehow Ted Cruz has found a way to find himself out of the country and unavailable when disaster strikes in Texas again. It seems incredible, but I guess if you stop and think about it, it's Texas. And there's a couple of things that are true about that. One, you're going to want to take as much vacation time away from Texas as possible. Those of you who are proud of Texas and proud of living there know very well that it's fun to take a vacation. And we'll take that in stride. And I'm sure there are plenty of great things to spend your time on in Texas, even if you're on vacation and living in Texas. I live in El Paso. I want a vacation in a different part of Texas. Sure, fine. Go ahead. Ted Cruz wants to leave the country every time, though. That's kind of weird. One time, of course, for Cancun during the middle of the winter freeze, and now a very summer event, the heavy rains and flash floods, and he has found himself, is he in Greece? Did I read that correctly? What can I tell you? The guy's a sophisticated world traveler. Anyway, out of the country once again, and that's pretty funny. And, amazingly, he's just never there for Texas. But then again, do you really want Ted Cruz there? Do you feel like he's there for you? Is he an empathizer? Is he going to free up, federal funds that aren't going to be freed up for Texas, for God's sake, by a Republican president anyway? On the other hand, plenty of stories about the unprepared folks at FEMA or the dismantling of FEMA while they're going to need it very badly, and waving off the fact that, for instance, the FEMA administrator is like nowhere to be found, has had nothing to say. Trump golfed through the whole thing, but then again, you don't want the president on the ground in the middle of rescue or rebuilding operations, disrupting everything anyway. If you want to be, fair and impose the same standards on Republican and Democratic presidents, but the visuals of being at a golf resort the whole time, probably not the best. But never mind all of that. And let's see, other things that have happened over the past couple of days. New tariff threats, because Wednesday, tomorrow, I guess, is the end of the 90-day pause on the big, quote-unquote retaliatory tariffs that aren't retaliating for anything. And so it's the end of the taco period, I guess, right? Trump has chickened out. He suspended the tariffs for 90 days. And now we get to see whether at the end of the 90 days there's another taco motion or what, But remember, we were also promised, well, sure, we're pausing for 90 days, but that's only to make all the deals with the whole world. We're going to have 90 deals in 90 days. And there are no deals in 90 days. Instead, the administration insists, no, we have, a couple of them. But they're not even pretending they have their 90. They're just saying, even the handful that they have, they're really just pretending. Those things are like agreements to agree, as we've heard along the way with the UK, with a couple of others that they have basically said, why don't we go back to the way it was before, or reimpose the same tariffs that we used to have before I started screwing around with them. Or, I don't know, I said 10% as a minimum, so I don't know, I guess yours is 10%. Is that a deal? No. That's, if you ask, what's the deal with what we're going to be doing with Vietnam? If the answer is, well, we said 10% and then we couldn't figure anything out, so I guess it's 10%. That's not a deal, that's just where the chips fall, I guess. And, it was just interesting to watch Trump so energetically pursuing the trade agenda. So apparently the 90-day period began with the world is beating a path to our door. They all want to be, of course, a part of the American market, and that's easy enough to believe. It's very valuable. But the whole world is calling, with Trump. It's always the telephone. They're all calling me, looking to make a deal. And now that there are no deals made, the story has changed. Actually, we haven't heard from most countries. They were beating the doors down before. You can't meet with them all. It's just too many. Yeah, I know. That's why you're not going to have 90 deals in 90 days. No. We could have 100 deals. I don't know. Every country wants to get it, but you can't talk to them all. You can't. And it's now become, well, I'm sending them a letter, which is amazing because, well, one, that's paperwork, and Trump doesn't do paperwork. But two, Really? So we're going to have negotiations with every country in the world. Or I'm going to send every country in the world, whoever, is going to get a form letter. Dear Gambia, if you would like to participate in the greatest economy the world has ever seen, please pay me $10 billion. I don't even know what the number is. Right? Or you got to pay the American people 10%. It's a whole thing, but his idea of how tariffs work doesn't reflect reality anyway. So it essentially comes down to you got to pay me money. Okay. How do you like that? Please let me know if you need my bank information. Sincerely, Donald Trump. I don't know what he's writing to these countries, but a letter to them on day 89 of the 90-day pause. I guess it just doesn't look like anything's going to happen now. But I don't know. I'm not certain what. Well, here's a hint over on the front page of Daily Kos here. Emily Singer has written this up. Guess which countries Trump is threatening with more tariffs now? Should I guess, or is this meant to be that the answer is so obvious that of course you're going to guess? China? I don't know. Let's see. On Monday, in a pair of poorly written letters, I figured as much, President Donald Trump threatened to impose a 25% tariff now. Numbers changing all the time, which is exactly what you want, by the way, domestically. That is spurring millions of people across the country to build factories in their backyards to make up for, to domestically produce that which we can no longer import because the tariff prices are so high, but we're not paying them, but other people don't want to pay them for us or something like that. Plus also Mexico is building the wall. But yeah, lots of people are starting factories based on the fact that the tariffs are 50, 100, 10, 25, 2,000%, 672 tomorrow, 671, 671.5. I guess, of all the factors that would go into deciding to invest millions of dollars in long-term infrastructure construction, total price instability and inscrutability into the process, probably the number one factor you're looking for in putting millions of dollars into concrete to build a factory that will stand 100 years to make the products that we may or may not want made in this country at any price tomorrow, depending on what side of the bed this guy wakes up on. All right, so there we are. On Monday, pair of poorly written letters. Now, 25% tariff on South Korea and Japan beginning on August 1st if the companies within those countries do not, quote, decide to build or manufacture product within the United States. We invite you to participate in the extraordinary economy of the United States, the number one market in the world by far, Trump wrote in the letters, which were overloaded with commas. That's good. I like him using commas. And filled with nonsensical capitalizations. South Korea has expressed an interest in negotiations with Trump, but said that it's unclear that what Trump even wants out of an agreement, which makes the negotiations difficult. That's not what makes them difficult, but it's a complicating factor, no doubt. We're doing our best, and the goal is to reach a genuinely mutual beneficial outcome, but at this stage, both sides still haven't clearly defined what exactly they want. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung told the Singaporean outlet The Straits Times. All I can say for now is that we're doing our utmost. Trump's letters come 2 days before the 90-day pause in his Liberation Day. Remember that? Liberation Day tariffs is set to expire, leaving Trump with several options. He can let the astronomical tariffs he placed on nearly every country on the planet go into effect. He can pause the tariffs again, taco, or some sort of middle ground where he puts a new and arbitrary tariff on imported goods if trade deals aren't made in time. The letters to South Korea and Japan suggest he's going with that third option. Economists say, arrest him, put him in the cuckoo bin. Economists say that imposing a 25% tariff on South Korea and Japan will be bad for the economy, as companies will merely pass down those taxes onto American consumers, spiking inflation to levels that could plunge the country into recession. Do I have any sort of panic noising that I could use for this? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, there's that. The United States imports, of course, billions of dollars worth of goods from South Korea and Japan, including machinery and mechanical appliances, transportation equipment, chemicals, plastics, and rubber. Ooh, rubber. All right. Trump, for his part, said, I don't like rubbers. Okay. Trump said when he paused the Liberation Day tariffs that he would make 90 trade deals in 90 days with countries. That's true. It was going to be with countries. But with 2 days to go before the deadline. And I saw them announce this a couple of days ago. All right, 90 deals in 90 days. Well, we didn't do that, but we still have 90 hours left. So here we go. Not a single deal fully signed. The so-called deals that Trump said are in the works with China, Vietnam, and the United Kingdom. He loves calling the United Kingdom. Not Great Britain, but and not UK, United Kingdom, are horrible for American consumers, as it turns out, as they will lead to increased tariffs on items imported to the United States from those countries that companies will almost certainly pass down to American consumers in the form of increased prices. Of course, it's unclear if the new tariff threat against Japan and South Korea will ever come to fruition. Trump has caved on nearly all of his tariff announcements, earning him the pejorative nickname Taco. You know how that goes. Indeed, the letters he sent to the two countries said, these tariffs, capital T tariffs, may be modified upward or downward, depending on our relationship with your country. Nevertheless, the stock market responded negatively to Trump's latest trade mishigas. Nice. Mishigas. Good usage. With the Dow Jones Industrial Average falling more than 500 points. Ooh, crash. Oh, well. Not surprising, I guess, and not on any aspect of it, that the 90 days would expire without any deals being made, that he would lie, and saying that I think he was asked about it the other day, and the video that I saw said, no, all those deals are done. I told you that's all finished. Something about the letters. I sent most of them. They didn't answer. I sent them a letter. So, I texted them. They haven't agreed to pay me a tremendous amount of money yet. So, all right, continuing on. It's what can I tell you? It's crazy. All the stories are just, I don't know, sad and outrageous. But let's see. We've covered bits and pieces of all of them. I don't know that we're going to need to read the full text of any of the stories behind them, but I will include them as links. These were the stories that inspired today's discussion. However, there is at least one legal development that I think I'd like to share in its entirety. Chris Geidner has been reporting on, and there's been an awful lot of developments in court over the last couple of days too. Oh, geez. All right. Well, I guess this one's not going to work out in the original version, but I guess the pocket version available to us for one more day at least. I don't know how much. I guess, well, we'll have to see what the change is starting tomorrow about whether or not Pocket helps us get some of this content that's otherwise protected by paywalls. Got to find a good read it later service that ignores paywalls. Anyway, he was covering at least one such development in the Abrego Garcia case, or at least some of those connected to it. Bombshell report, he says, alleges that El Salvador, the country, disclaimed responsibility for those that the U.S. sent to CCOT, the terrorist prison, as they like to call it, but a terrorism prison, really, that they operate there. And, well, let's see, run down Chris's coverage of the event and see if we can jump in the middle of things here. I know he's been covering this since forever. President Donald Trump, he says, has long made a mockery of norms, precipitating the "this is not normal" refrain of his first term. In his second term, going beyond ignoring norms, Trump is seeking to upend the basic building blocks of law in America. We've certainly seen that happening. And given this weekend's South Sudan deportations. Yes, something else that happened over the weekend. The U.S. Supreme Court is not always going to get in his way, or hardly ever, as the case may be. They're once again jumping out of the way of the third country deportation practices, now deporting people punitively for no particular reason to countries from which they did not come and to which they have no connection, and which are inherently dangerous places to be at all for any reason, much less if you are dumped into a prison there with no hope of even being able to figure out what are my legal options and how do I even reach them. Is there even a legal system where I am? But deporting people to South Sudan, guess what? Those flights took off and those people are gone. But the pushback remains. Questions are ongoing and circumstances are rapidly changing in several key areas in which Trump's actions would fundamentally alter what law means. A bombshell filing on Monday in one of the Alien Enemies Act cases challenging the truthfulness of the Trump administration's claims about its agreement with El Salvador regarding the people who've been sent to the country's notorious CCOT prison. In this filing, those challenging the administration asserted that officials from El Salvador told the United Nations, who is investigating all of this. I know everybody says, oh, gee whiz, what's the UN going to do about it? The UN is the only body doing anything about any of this. So don't get down on the UN just yet. Don't know what they can resolve, but, well, they're giving us this story anyway. The officials from El Salvador told the UN that it, quote, facilitated the use of the Salvadoran prison infrastructure by the U.S., but that, quote, jurisdiction and legal responsibility, unquote, for those sent there remains, again, quote, exclusively with the U.S. Much more on that below, Chris promises. I'd like to hear more about that one. So it's a prison. It's owned by El Salvador, maintained and run by El Salvador. It is in El Salvador. The United States has already said in Kilmar Abrego Garcia's cases earlier, we can't get him out because we don't control that place. And it's the Salvadorans who run everything. The Salvadorans tell the UN a different story, that it's just like renting space. You're Airbnb-ing people in here. They're still American. They're American prisoners. We're just renting you the space. We don't do anything about, we don't have control over who goes in and who goes out. It's up to the United States. The United States is, it's up to El Salvador. Very familiar situation. Everybody's pointing you to a different desk, right? More broadly, with his invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, Trump is attempting to use expansive wartime powers to operationalize a military-based understanding of immigration opposition and expand underlying wartime powers, though, where there's no war. So that's not all, though. With his effort to end birthright citizenship, Trump is seeking to ignore the 14th Amendment's text and the interpretation of virtually everyone asked to do so since. Everyone's interpretation since the beginning. Okay, yes. With his attack on law firms, Trump is hoping to scare would-be defenders of the rule of law into submission by subverting the power of law and using it against them. There is no Trump-era Supreme Court resolution of any of these issues yet. In the first two, the High Court pushed off final resolution on the issue through non-merits rulings in emergency applications brought by the Trump administration to block lower court orders. In the final set of cases, the Justice Department steadfastly avoided appellate review for as long as possible. Any one of these issues ultimately being decided in Trump's favor would mark a sharp departure in the rule of law. Multiple of them being decided as he wishes would transform what law even means in America. Given that, the mass of crises prompted by this administration's actions and inactions should not push these three issues out of mind. So, stepping back and diving in, where do things stand in those challenges? Let's find out, or let's see how Chris describes them. The birthright citizenship cases, he describes this way. After the Supreme Court's June 27th decision ending universal injunctions, as they were called, based on a cramped understanding of the point of law in an opinion by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, lower courts got back to work assessing two main issues about the proper scope of injunctions after this Trump v. Casa decision. What's more, they are doing so with a clock running, given that the Supreme Court held that the policy section of Trump's executive order seeking to end birthright citizenship would go into effect 30 days after the date of this opinion, so after July 26th. As DOJ later told one federal judge, July 27th of this year is the earliest date on which defendants may begin to apply Executive Order 14160, that's the birthright citizenship ending, the purported citizenship ending executive order, and they'll apply it to persons covered by the order, whoever they may be. The court held that injunctions in general litigation can't be broader than necessary to provide complete relief to each plaintiff with standing to sue. The main area of litigation outside of that, so with the potential for broad relief, is class action litigation. But a big question left unresolved by Barrett and the court has to be addressed before we can even get to class action lawsuits. Are the injunctions blocking Trump's order in cases brought by groups of states properly nationwide in scope, because the nationwide scope is necessary to provide complete relief to the states that sued, right? We just still don't know what this is supposed to mean. And it was a dumb standard to begin with. The whole idea is that law, these decisions are supposed to apply to all potential plaintiffs and all parties similarly situated. You're supposed to be able to understand if you're doing exactly the same thing as is being addressed in this case, and the case is decided, the same result will apply to you. You could go ahead and sue separately and say, my name's not on this paper. No, it's not. But logic and consistency demands that what happened to the plaintiff and defendant in this case will happen to the plaintiff and defendant in your case too, unless you can distinguish it in some fashion. And if you can't distinguish it in some fashion, the case is just going to end up being dismissed pretty quickly. You're going to lose in summary judgment right up front. But okay, sure. And even the out that Amy Coney Barrett provides, or the rule she attempts to impose on this, doesn't answer the question of what if 5 of us sue? Okay, whoops. Well, that took me a long time to get finished with the task that I decided to undertake during the 1-minute break, which I really should have waited for the 2-minute break. Hi, everybody. We're going to have to see how that comes out in production later on. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I was just thinking, though, as we left, we were saying the issue would be what happens if 5 people, well, I had said 5 people sue, but in fact the question was what if 5 states are suing, right? Even if one state sues, and the question is, well, to whom does this apply? The state itself, the state as state, everyone in the state, every resident of the state, every legal resident of the state, every resident of the state, legal or otherwise, anyone passing through the state during which time they're arrested? What? We don't know. Again, though, if New Jersey were to sue and to establish that the federal government was doing something improper, why is it that the fact that New Jersey was the one to sue, why should it mean that the same thing, which is unconstitutional and illegal in New Jersey under the federal constitution, isn't also likewise unconstitutional in New York or California? And the answer is, I don't know. They didn't get up and sue. And what if they did, though? Well, okay, this is now illegal and unconstitutional in the 5 states that joined together to sue. Oh, by the way, you can hear there's the patter of the rain. I don't know if that's coming across the microphone or not, but it's 10 o'clock, so time for the watering to happen during the next 10 minutes. So we'll pretend we're in a tropical storm here and proceed apace. All right, so if 5 states sue, I guess they're willing to say if your 5 states were party to the lawsuit, okay, New York, New Jersey, California, I don't know. We need 2 more. Delaware and Connecticut, let's say, have joined in this, and so now those things are unconstitutional in those 5 states. That's nonsense. The Constitution is the same Constitution everywhere. Things that are unconstitutional in New Jersey are federally are unconstitutional in every other state too. But apparently, Chris's question is, okay, so if a order can only be as narrow or as broad as necessary to provide complete relief to the parties, then, I mean, like, what happens? I guess you say, all right, well, what if a New Jersey resident is subjected to this unconstitutional treatment in Nebraska while they're there on vacation, and Nebraska wasn't a party to the litigation, but are all New Jersey residents covered by the injunction no matter where they go, or do they have to stay within the confines of New Jersey, or what? It never made any sense. And it just, on a very basic level, makes no sense to say, yeah, that's unconstitutional on this side of this imaginary line, but not unconstitutional on that side. It's one thing with a national boundary. With a state boundary, not so much. So that's going to create all sorts of problems, obviously. Back to Chris's discussion here. The states have argued that the only way for their interests to be protected is a nationwide injunction, regardless of whether other states are not suing, because people can travel freely in the United States. And this would mean that, for example, children of New Jersey residents might not have citizenship at birth if born in a state that didn't sue. As such, and as Barrett acknowledged, such a nationwide injunction does not purport to directly benefit non-parties. But she also noted that the Trump administration argued more narrow relief could be possible. The Supreme Court did not resolve the question. They didn't have to. So now lower courts in the 2 multi-state challenges are addressing that, and they're doing it in different ways, which is going to be problematic and going to end up, of course, back at the Supreme Court. In State of Washington versus Trump, the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, where DOJ's appeal of a preliminary injunction below is pending, the Ninth Circuit issued an order on the date of the CASA opinion, directing the parties to submit briefs addressing the effect, if any, of the United States Supreme Court's decision in Trump v. CASA on the issues presented in this case. Those briefs are due to be submitted by Friday up in New Jersey, previously mentioned. New Jersey versus Trump, on the other hand, the Court of Appeals for the First Circuit denied DOJ's request for supplemental briefing, instead concluding that the appeals court consideration of the post-CASA landscape would benefit from the district court's preliminary consideration of the question. Okay. And there's some clips here of the legal language from the decisions, which may or may not serve to clear anything up here, but says here, moreover, CASA provides fresh guidance regarding the equitable powers of the federal courts, thus in aid of our consideration of the issues on appeal and consistent with the Supreme Court's instruction that the lower courts should determine whether a narrower injunction is appropriate and move expeditiously to ensure the injunction comports with the principles of equity described in CASA. We conclude that it is prudent to remand to the district court while retaining our jurisdiction over the appeal. Well, okay, nothing different there. I'm going to just move on to the rest of Chris's description here. Oh, and I guess because we're looking at the pocket version of it, the formatting is a little bit out of sorts, and so it's difficult to follow the flow of the writing here. Let's see. All right, I'll jump down to here. DOJ's brief is due Tuesday. A response is due from the plaintiffs by July 15th. DOJ's reply is due to the reply, I guess, due July 17th. A hearing when? July 18th. All of that is only the multi-state cases. A key part of Barrett's opinion in CASA was the assessment that individual plaintiffs can seek for broader relief through class action litigation. That process involves additional steps, of course, and creates new complications not present where seeking a universal injunction, but it is a real path forward, particularly for cases backed by advocacy organizations and private lawyers. And that's what really has to happen here. You can't, people being held in detention centers in multiple states all over the place who, A, maybe don't speak the language, and B, have no access generally to regular communications and lawyers and no assets with which to back, to reach out nationwide and try to cobble together a class for a class action, are going to have to rely on the organizations, the groups, as the Democrats sometimes dismiss them, to do this work. So in Casa versus Trump, the plaintiffs themselves filed an amended complaint that day as well, turning the case into a class action lawsuit and seeking class certification and a temporary restraining order regarding their claims. U.S. District Judge Deborah Boardman held a quick hearing on that the next Monday, that was June 30th, at which DOJ raised a number of objections to class certification. Can you believe it? Some of which related to the fact that organization members would already have relief under even a narrowed post-CASA injunction in the case. That's a little esoteric, but Boardman decided to consider the temporary restraining order, TRO, request as a preliminary injunction request, a different vehicle here, which will allow fuller consideration and make appellate processes clearer, and set a briefing schedule at the hearing, including on class certification. DOJ filed its opposition on Monday. The plaintiff's reply is due by 5 p.m. tomorrow, Wednesday. The ACLU, meanwhile, filed a new lawsuit, Barbara versus Trump, in federal court in New Hampshire on June 27th, seeking class certification and class-wide preliminary injunction. The district judge there, Joseph LaPlante, held a hearing on the new lawsuit on June 30th, set a briefing and argument schedule in the new case. LaPlante had earlier considered another case addressing the executive order and issued a more limited preliminary injunction than the other cases, which remain on appeal, once again, in the First Circuit. New Jersey is in the Third Circuit. I don't know how. We must have gotten wires crossed in the reporting there somewhere, unless there's some other party to the case which would have moved this thing to the First Circuit. But okay, New Hampshire's First Circuit, New Jersey Third Circuit. All right, let's see. So anyway, once again, I guess the real big issue there is they put a new hurdle in the way of injunctions saying, oh, we're not closing off the avenue. You just have to have a class action suit. Good luck getting certified as a class, and good luck not having that certification opposed by the federal government. Anyway, there's the law firm cases have had some developments there. 4 federal judges appointed by presidents of both parties have heard the 4 cases challenging the Trump executive orders targeting law firms. They've all agreed that the orders are unconstitutional and null and void, as multiple judges have ruled. Unlike its actions across the board in many other cases, DOJ did not try to appeal the temporary restraining orders in those cases. And also, unlike some of the other cases, DOJ did not immediately appeal the evening that an injunction was issued. Instead, in the first of the final judgments in these cases, the Perkins-Coie challenge, DOJ, which has 60 days to appeal a judgment, waited until the 59th day to appeal, and on June 30th filed its notice of appeal in the D.C. Circuit. It has taken no appeal yet in the other 3 cases. In short, even this DOJ appears to know what a lawless loser these cases are. The Alien Enemies Act cases, which is what brought me to this article in the first place, now comes up. The Trump administration has appealed the first 2 decisions against the legality of Trump's March 15th invocation of the Alien Enemies Act out of the Southern District of Texas and the Southern District of New York. All Southern districts. Isn't that interesting? Not really. On June 27th, DOJ filed its notice of appeal in the Texas case. That's JAV versus Trump. The first final judgment entered against Trump's action. On July 3rd, DOJ filed its notice of appeal in the New York case, GFF versus Trump. In the case that went up to the Supreme Court out of the Northern District of Texas, meanwhile, after a district judge in an appeals court initially denied relief, arguments were held at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit on June 30th before judges Leslie Southwick, a George W. Bush appointee, Andy Oldham, a Trump appointee, and Irma Carrillo Ramirez, a Biden appointee. Those arguments in WMM versus Trump followed the 7-2 Supreme Court ruling that more process was required than the Trump administration was giving to those it was seeking to remove under the AEA proclamation, and not ruling on the underlying question about whether Trump properly invoked the AEA. However, the biggest news in the cases on Monday came in the original JGG versus Trump litigation before Chief Judge James Boasberg in federal court in D.C. There, the lawyers at the ACLU and Democracy Forward, representing the people at El Salvador's CCOT prison, filed a bombshell, we're ready for this bombshell at last, bombshell document about El Salvador's claims regarding the agreement it reached with the U.S. In the case, the lawyers for those in CCOT previously argued that the U.S. maintains constructive custody over the people it sent to CCOT. What is constructive custody? Again, well, clearly you can see they're in El Salvador and they're being guarded by Salvadoran guards in a Salvadoran prison. But the question is, are they there because they are in the custody of El Salvador because they violated Salvadoran law? Clearly not. Who's responsible for their being there, and whose custody are they? Everybody's pointing the finger at everybody else. The judges are saying they're in the constructive custody of the United States. What does that mean? Basically, they're saying, well, in theory, they're in the custody of the United States. Sure, the guards are from El Salvador. The prison is in El Salvador. It's a Salvadoran prison, and they're held there on Salvadoran. They're held there on whose authority? Why are they there? Americans have directed them to be there. The people who have granted the authority to the guards to not let them out are Salvadoran, true. But even if the physical custody is Salvadoran, the constructive custody, we're going to just have to, constructive, I guess, should be viewed as made up, but necessary. And logically, the only possible conclusion, constructive custody of the United States. But the Justice Department, through a declaration from a State Department official, asserted that, as Boasberg summed it up, quoting from the declaration, both detention and ultimate disposition of CCOT plaintiffs are matters within the legal authority of El Salvador. Somehow the Justice Department has come to that conclusion. So they think it gets them out of trouble for the moment. Based in large part on that declaration, Boasberg ruled last month that though it was a close question, the petitioners hadn't proven that the U.S. maintained constructive custody of the people on the current record, though he provided other relief. A bombshell development on Monday questions that constructive custody record and could upend the Trump administration's argument in the case and to the public. So remember here, it's all very confusing, but they came to the conclusion in the district court that maybe they really are in the custody of El Salvador after all, in which case maybe we can't order the DOJ to return them that easily or release them. Well, that's why this is a bombshell. I guess documents that the petitioners filed in the case allege that officials from El Salvador told the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances that the country's authorities have not arrested, detained, or transferred the persons referred to in the communications of the working group. El Salvador, per the UN Working Group's report attached to the filing, acknowledged that it had facilitated the use of Salvadoran prison infrastructure by the U.S., but also stated that in this context, the jurisdiction and legal responsibility for persons lie exclusively with the U.S. Isn't that something? Are they all just pointing fingers at the other and dodging responsibility? Probably. We're not sure that they actually believe this, but when push comes to shove and they want to get out of trouble with the UN, they say, oh, no. We're just holding these people for the U.S. at their direction. It says here, as set forth in the attached report, the government of El Salvador responded to the UN inquiry opened by the four families, asking about the disappearance of their family members. The Salvadoran state emphatically states that its authorities have not arrested, detained, or transferred the persons referred to in the communications of the working group, the actions of the state of El Salvador have been limited to the implementation of a bilateral cooperation mechanism with another state, through which it has facilitated the use of the Salvadoran prison infrastructure for the custody of persons detained within the scope of the justice system and law enforcement of that other state. That's us. In this context, the jurisdiction and legal responsibility for these persons lie exclusively with the competent foreign authorities by virtue of the international agreements signed and in accordance with the principles of sovereignty and international cooperation in criminal matters. In this regard, the actions attributable to the Salvadoran state are limited to its sovereignty and territorial jurisdiction, and therefore it cannot be held responsible for the failure to observe the principle of non-refoulement. Oh my, I don't know. With respect to the persons mentioned. It gets a little technical there. But, yeah, so in the UN's opinion, El Salvador has insisted we're just renting out prison space to the U.S., and we're holding people there at their request. I guess you could analogize it to an arrest and extradition kind of situation, right? If someone's been arrested locally in El Salvador, but they're wanted in the United States, and the case against them for violating Salvadoran law for which they were originally arrested is somehow dismissed, and they challenge their continued detention, but El Salvador says, well, we're continuing to hold them because there's an extradition request by the United States. And our treaty is such that we're going to continue to hold them on behalf of the United States. But in El Salvadoran prisons, it would be understandable what was going on here. And I guess you could analogize to this and say, as a business venture, and maybe this is unwise or unprecedented, but it's not outside of the sovereign power of the Salvadoran state to do this. We're going to rent prison space to the United States, and we'll use Salvadoran prisons and Salvadoran guards to guard people on their behalf. But since they've never charged any of them with a violation of Salvadoran law, that's the only conclusion you could possibly come to. Otherwise, they're just illegally detained with no charge. And I assume that's a violation of international law. I don't know. As Boasberg noted in his June opinion, the federal declaration came from Michael G. Kozak, who serves as the senior bureau official with the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs at the State Department. Boasberg also noted his difficulty with accepting Kozak's claims and issued a warning at the time. This conclusion, to be sure, presumes the truthfulness and reliability of the Kozak Declaration, which is rendered more difficult given the government's troubling conduct throughout this case, he wrote. Later, the court reminds the government that any official who makes knowingly false statements in a sworn declaration subjects himself to perjury prosecution. The lawyers challenging the Trump administration specifically alleged in their Monday filing that this new evidence contradicts the underlying custody conclusion in the Kozak Declaration of May 9th, 2025, which is dated after El Salvador's responses to the UN and after petitioners sought habeas review. The date habeas attaches. All right. So that's rather astonishing all by itself, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it and reading through the timeline here. So the UN questions El Salvador about this situation at some point. The Salvadorans say, no, we're just holding people for the United States. The Kozak Declaration, so the Stephen Kozak State Department guy, tells Michael Kozak, tells the courts in the United States, I guess this is related to the claim that, no, we can't release him. He's in the custody of El Salvador. There's nothing we can do to bring him back. And El Salvador is saying, no, this is all on you. So everybody disclaiming responsibility, but I guess they're the courts look to be resolving this in terms of saying somebody's got to have custody of this guy. And the Salvadorans who have physical custody of him, and it's interesting, and so I guess we'll ask them in the first instance. We didn't ask them, the UN asked them, but it's at least contradictory evidence and directly contradicts what Michael Kozak said, which is that they're in Salvadoran custody. And he said that later in time then the Salvadorans had already declared to the UN that these people are really constructively in U.S. custody. So that's going to create some problems. Whether or not the logic is overwhelming and it forces anything to actually happen, we have yet to find out. So I think the answer there is probably no in the end. And everybody's just going to be standing around there pointing at one another, saying, none of this makes any sense, but we're not letting any of these guys out of this prison anytime soon. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is back in the United States, as you know, and once again, crazy legal parsing happening in his case as well. U.S. seems intent in charging him with something so that they can continue to hold him, and then hopefully they think they'll end up convicting him of something terrible or even minor and saying, well, that's the basis on which we want to use the Airbnb agreement we have with El Salvador and send him back to that prison. They seem determined to just ignore all law and reason at this point. Okay, another thing I wanted to bring to your attention, and I think we can still fit it in before the first break, something Mark Sumner was posting on Blue Sky just yesterday, I think, and total shift away from the confusing court situation, but we'll just have to keep an eye on that and see if we can't find someone else who can help update us and also cut through the confusion of all of it. I mean, Chris has done a great job reporting it for legal eyes and ears, and we're doing our best to interpret it on the fly here, but there's still some clarification necessary. But this, I think everyone can understand. Mark is writing about the latest developments out of the horrific bill that Republicans in Congress did, in fact, succeed in passing as we left at the end of last week. And depending on what you want to call it, you know, I know everybody hates to use the Trump terms for it. And the one Mark has landed on here is the big bastard of a bill, right? Interesting. It struck me the other day that I guess since they were trying to call it the one big beautiful bill, but then they shortened it to big beautiful bill and then BBB, which is the same initials as the Build Back Better thing, which also reminds me, who was it that pointed this out? Maybe Brian Beutler pointed out the weird situation. Could have been Josh Marshall, could have been Brian, could have been somebody else, pointing out that allegedly the American newspapers wrestled philosophically with the idea that they couldn't refer to Biden's Build Back Better bill by that name because that would be too partisan of them. And yet they had no trouble, referring to this one as the big beautiful bill. Strangely, that hesitancy disappeared as soon as Trump wanted them to do this thing. Anyway, Mark was writing about something completely different, saying that Tesla, remember them? Their CFO is the treasurer of the new political party. Tesla's biggest revenue stream is about to disappear. You would think that the CFO would have, something to do over here, but he's off on a political mission for Elon. Trump's big bastard of a bill, he says, doesn't get rid of carbon credits. It does something far more odious, and Tesla stands to lose the most. It's a pretty quick summary here. I'll see if I can read it into the record for you. Automakers have had to meet some version of the CAFE standards, the fuel efficiency standards, remember? Since 1978. Those manufacturers who can't get their average fuel economy down to the standard can avoid penalties by buying offsets from manufacturers who exceed the standards. These offsets are a big factor in Tesla's profits, of course, because they're zero emissions vehicles, right? So you can buy those offsets from us. The Senate parliamentarian, in considering this bill, ruled that the Republicans couldn't just kill CAFE standards as part of this budget bill. That's outside of the scope. They did something sneakier, though. They changed the multiplier that the EPA uses to assess its fines if you don't meet CAFE standards. And guess what the new multiplier is? The new multiplier is 0. And what happens, of course, when you multiply anything by 0, now no matter how badly automakers exceed the limit, they will be owing $0 in fines. In theory, the limits still exist. Automakers will probably receive a big official letter from Trump, informing them of their $0 fines while they load up their fleets with heavy and inefficient vehicles. Tesla, though, will still be the biggest owner of offset credits. Only those credits will now also be worth $0. You just don't need them. So in theory, this zeroes out a huge, in actuality really, zeroes out a huge source of income that has propped up Tesla profitability since forever. Tesla and other EV makers will see the price of all their vehicles go up as well, and they'll lose the revenue stream of selling credits to the traditional manufacturers. An absolutely enormous hit. Tesla stands to lose the most because they sell the most EVs. The other guys will take a smaller hit, and those companies, the other companies, won't even be getting any damage from the loss of EV credits because most of their vehicles were too expensive to qualify in the first place. Yikes.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm still here. Should have tried to do that last break chore during this break. But anyway, so Mark Sumner was telling us all about how much money and revenue Tesla now stands to lose. He kicked it off, by the way, with a link to a carboncredits.com article at some point. I don't know what the date on this thing is. I guess I could open it up. But the headline and subheader really told the story. This is from January of 2025. Tesla's carbon credit revenue soars to $2.76 billion amid profit drop. They were losing sales already in January of 2025. And though Tesla's profits took a hit even before then, in 2024, Tesla's profits were down 23% in 2024. I guess maybe, I don't know whether they fell off a cliff during the campaign, during which Elon involved himself in the campaign from July or so onward, or whether they were falling anyway, or both. But as they say here, one revenue stream kept surging: carbon credit sales. The car maker reached a new record in selling regulatory credits, recording a 54% jump from 2023. As the EV market evolves and emissions rules tighten, can Tesla keep profiting from carbon credits? The answer now is no, but this article was written with the assumption that there would still be the need for carbon credits because the EPA would still be enforcing CAFE standards. So it was an interesting maneuver there. Right? Originally, Republicans are like, fuel standards, let's get rid of that. Well, that's pretty unpopular. How are we going to make that work? That'll just be filibuster. Oh, we'll stick it in reconciliation. There's no filibuster allowed. Yeah, but there's rules about what you can and can't put in reconciliation. Who cares about rules? We'll nuke those rules. Well, they weren't willing to nuke the rules. And the parliamentarian said, no, changing CAFE standards, getting rid of them, eliminating them, that's not budgetary impact predominantly. That's a policy decision. Doesn't fit the Byrd rule. Take that out of reconciliation. Okay, well, here's a way. So the rule is it has to be primarily about budget impact. And can we get it through this way? we'll leave cafe standards in place. It's just the number that the EPA uses, that multiplier, right, to decide how much will they be fining companies that don't meet the cafe standards will now be zero. We're not saying you have zero ability to impose those fines. You can impose them, but every fine that you impose has to be multiplied by the following factor, 0. Okay. Somehow that passes muster. It has a budgetary impact. That's true. And I guess you could say it's chiefly, I don't know. I could still see them saying, no, this is still chiefly a policy issue. The budgetary impact, it's not that it's got no budgetary impact. It has one. It's just, one, it's negative. And two, is, I guess, I don't know whether you could argue about whether or not it exceeds the 10-year budget window thing or not. I mean, I guess you could phase that out and maybe the multiplier returns in 10 years unless they do something else to keep it at 0. That's possible. But it has a negative budget impact, but, it doesn't have to be a positive impact, I guess. So anyway, apparently that passes muster. And so a, 2.76, nearly $3 billion annual stream of income is erased entirely across the board in the electric vehicle market, but Tesla held the most of those things because they sell the most electric vehicles, period. And then the other factor in all this was the tax credit that you could get for buying an electric vehicle in general as a consumer, which was a consumer incentive to get an electric vehicle, is also gone. But because the way that incentive was written, even in the Biden bill, right? Wasn't it like the retail price of the car had to be pretty low in order to qualify for the credit? In other words, I guess if you were buying $100,000, $200,000 electric vehicles, the tax credit wasn't necessarily what you were after. It was just a windfall for you. So I think they restricted it to electric vehicles with a retail price under $50,000 were eligible for a credit. Okay. Well, we're eliminating that credit anyway. All right. That'll affect the lower end of the market. And that's bad because that's probably where, a significant number of those sales are happening. But Rivian, expensive car, was never qualifying for it anyway. Lucid, expensive car, never qualifying for that credit anyway. They could sell the credits, the carbon offset credits, but now they can't at $0. So, all right, that's a wild development. It's almost as if the Republicans were out to punish Elon Musk in some way. How strange. He did have one other item to add to one other post in that thread saying new startups won't be able to tap offsets for a revenue stream, and that's an issue. It's going to be harder to get an EV company off the ground. GM, whose EV sales were up over 100% in the first quarter, may turn out to be the big winner with an array of gas and EVs at varied prices. So that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if GM, had a great quarter or year or whatever, and Tesla didn't. But at any rate, yeah, they're responsible for the largest number of electric vehicles on the roads, and we do want that to happen, even if we don't want Elon Musk necessarily to continue to profit from it. The whole thing has just been ridiculous from start to finish, and a huge joke to realize that Trump is eliminating the EV purchase tax credit plus screwing over the offset markets and badly damaging the EV sector because something America, when mere months earlier he had been exhibiting Teslas like a showroom on the White House lawn and told everybody he bought a Tesla. I still have my doubts about that, but I bought a Tesla. Well, now I'm going to sell it because they suck and I can't stand them. But this is one way to put the screws to Elon Musk and maybe even to the America Party, given that the only other high-ranking official in the America Party that there is the CFO of Tesla, who's now going to have to figure out how to plug a $3 billion hole in their revenue stream. But never mind that. It's not our problem. We'll focus on something else. All right, let's see. What else have we got here that was put away in Pocket on our last day of Pocket? I feel obliged to look through some of those things. And maybe our new Read It Later system will identify better what the various blue sky posts that we park on the page are without my having to go into them all the time. All right, let's see. Oh, this was an interesting one too. This takes us back to the Abrego Garcia case. And I think this is another way of describing the bombshell that Chris Geidner was trying to explain to us in a broader context, but this one very specifically focused on the declaration to the UN working group by the Salvadoran authorities. Anna Bauer has grabbed these two things and mashed them together for us to look at. She's the senior editor at Lawfare Media and on Blue Sky. She has taken up Kyle Cheney's reporting on that bombshell that Chris described to us by saying the Trump administration acknowledges in court that sending Abrego Garcia to El Salvador was a one-off mistake, which contradicts the White House's position, and also the fact that two others were erroneously sent to El Salvador and ordered back. This is another aspect of the same case, but I guess, not the same bombshell per se, but I think the bombshell plays into it. Remember that the issues swirling around the Abrego Garcia case at first were, one, that he was sent there by mistake, and eventually the government lawyer acknowledged that it was a mistake, and then they got rid of him. But also, even if it was a mistake, there wasn't one that they could fix because these people were in Salvadoran custody now, not American custody. So they told the American court, you can't order El Salvador to do anything. So we've decided those guys are being held by El Salvador. Meanwhile, the Salvadorans were having their actions reviewed by the UN, and they said, no, we're not holding those guys. America is. Don't come down on us. This is the United States' problem. Meanwhile, the United States is telling its own courts, no, the opposite is true. By the same token, they're also telling the courts this was a mistake. And at the same time, Stephen Miller is saying, no, it isn't a mistake. Here's a quote from him in April. He was not mistakenly sent to El Salvador. A DOJ lawyer who has since been relieved of duty, a saboteur, a Democrat, he put into a filing incorrectly that this was a mistaken removal. It was not. And yet the DOJ follows that up with, oh yeah, we're back to saying it was a mistake. Now, it was a one-off mistake, but it was a mistake nonetheless. So what can I tell you? Directly contradictory information coming from supposedly transparent governmental sources from two different governments, and some of it being filtered through the United Nations as well. The United Nations isn't participating in the cover-up. They're exposing the cover-up, but it's interesting development, certainly. And okay, that was parked in Pocket. And as you know, we're trying to clean things out today on the last day. Here's another interesting legal development that I guess we really ought to put on the record, even though this feels very disjointed. And it was going to feel that way in this weird, disoriented kind of a show anyway. But let's grab this New York Times piece from July 3rd. Charlie Savage, always important to check in with Charlie Savage. And this describes, I think he does a pretty good job, as I recall from skimming this article, describing the nature of this issue. It is small bore in the sense that it deals with something that we really shouldn't care a great deal about, i.e. TikTok. That too is a taco type situation. Trump just keeps extending the deadline. And now it's gotten to the point where it's a question of, is this a law or is it not? So although it's about something not that important, TikTok, unless you think, oh my gosh, this is actually an avenue for Chinese espionage, which was the original claim all along. But if you no longer believe that, or if you never believe that, or if you do believe it, I guess, it's still hard to wrap your head around TikTok being important in any way beyond, well, lots of kids find it entertaining and it's a lot of money to be grabbed in and around TikTok. But is it really a serious issue? Well, maybe not, but the legal status of the operation is something that can be expanded upon. The legal principle at stake, well, oddly enough, isn't actually going to be limited to the parties of the case, but has general applicability. Isn't that weird? Even as we're learning in other cases, no, nothing has general applicability anymore. Unless, of course, we want it to have general applicability. That's part of the problem with where we are legally with everything these days. All right, let's let Charlie Savage explain what's going on here. Trump claims sweeping power to nullify laws. The letters on the TikTok ban show. How so? That sounds bad, right? In purporting to license otherwise illegal conduct by tech firms, President Trump set a precedent expanding executive power, legal experts warned. And yeah, that's what happened here. Attorney General Pam Bondi told tech companies, this is important to get the nuance of it, told tech companies that they could lawfully violate a statute barring American companies from supporting TikTok, based on a sweeping claim that President Trump has the constitutional power to set aside laws, newly disclosed documents show. The too long didn't read if we don't get to all of it. You know about the TikTok ban. You know that he's been postponing the effective date of the TikTok ban all along. That's one thing. Okay, we're postponing the effective date. Can you do it? Can't you do it? I don't know. But it's one thing to say this law isn't in effect. It's another thing still to say, okay, the law is in effect. I'm not postponing the ban. This is not the option that he's taken. But he could have not postponed the ban, but instead said, look, the Department of Justice, as always, has prosecutorial discretion here. It is now current law that it's illegal to do whatever the hell it is that people were doing, and he didn't want them to do with TikTok, right? What was it? Unless they sold their ownership stake to an American group, their operations in the United States were illegal, and doing business with them would likewise be illegal. Well, the DOJ can decline to prosecute those cases, but it would still be illegal, technically speaking. They're just not charging you, right? Yes, okay, understood. Don't like it a great deal. We don't want to do it for extended periods of time for too many different areas of law, but whatever. But that's not what's happening here either. So, what is happening? Here I think we can get to the rest of it. In letters to companies like Apple and Google, Ms. Bondi wrote that Mr. Trump had decided that shutting down TikTok would interfere with his, quote, constitutional duties. How in the world does anything with TikTok at all interfere with constitutional duties of the President of the United States? So, the law banning the social media app must give way to his, quote, core presidential national security and foreign affairs powers. The letters, which became public on Thursday last week via Freedom of Information Act lawsuits, portrayed Mr. Trump as having nullified the legal effects of a statute that Congress passed by large bipartisan majorities in 2024 and that the Supreme Court unanimously upheld. Shortly after being sworn in, Mr. Trump issued an executive order directing the Justice Department to suspend enforcement of the TikTok ban, understandable, and has since repeatedly extended it. That step has been overshadowed by numerous other moves he's made to push at the boundaries of executive power in the opening months of his second administration. But some legal experts consider Mr. Trump's action, in this case in TikTok, and in particular, his orders claim, which Ms. Bondi endorsed in her letters, that he has the power to enable companies to lawfully violate the statute. That legal experts say they consider to be his starkest power grab of all. It appears to set a significant new precedent about the potential reach of presidential authority. They said, yeah. There are other things that are more important than TikTok in today's world, but for pure refusal to enforce the law, as Article 2 requires, it's just breathtaking, said Alan Z. Rosenstein, a University of Minnesota law professor who has written about the non-enforcement of the TikTok ban, referring to the part of the Constitution that says presidents, must take care to see that the laws be faithfully executed. The executive branch has the power, as a matter of prosecutorial discretion, to choose not to enforce laws in particular instances or to set priorities about what categories of lawbreaking they will prioritize when resources are limited. Previous presidents have occasionally made aggressive use of that power, including when President Obama temporarily shielded from deportation undocumented immigrants who had been brought to the country as children. But the Obama administration also said that such deferred action could be, and now we're watching it happen, could be revoked, and did not claim that it made their presence lawful, nor cease to enforce immigration law against others. In her letters, though, Ms. Bondi went far beyond that. Because of Mr. Trump's order, she said, tech firms that acted contrary to the statute were breaking no law, even in theory, and the department was, quote, irrevocably relinquishing any legal claims against them, including under future administrations, right? The people who are being deported now, dreamers who are being rounded up, whatever, are being gathered up because Obama acknowledged at the beginning, because that's the way everybody agreed the law would be interpreted. Well, I'm using my prosecutorial discretion, or the DOJ is using its prosecutorial discretion, and my suggestion perhaps, even though I'm not supposed to direct these things. But whatever. Maybe it was just wide open and everybody could see it. Look, we're using our prosecutorial discretion to just say we're just not going to prosecute these things. You're still in the country illegally, quote unquote, but we're just not going to make it a legal problem for you. That's not what they're doing here. Bondi is saying there isn't a law, just like there aren't Epstein files. There's no law that says there's a TikTok ban. What about this one right here that was passed in 2024, and we all remember it, and both sides of the aisle supported it overwhelmingly, and it was reviewed for constitutionality by the Supreme Court, and they upheld it? No, they didn't. Not, yeah, but we're not going to prosecute it. But no, it didn't happen. Or if it did happen, it's of no effect because the president says he's turning the law off. That's it. That's all they're doing. The companies, she wrote, committed no violation of the act and incurred no liability under the act during periods that Mr. Trump had declared a suspension of the law. She also told them that they may continue to provide services to TikTok without violating the act and without incurring any legal liability. Not only that, but she claims, she purports to be forswearing any such liability even under future administrations. People are being deported now because Trump ended the forbearance of the Obama administration. But he now declares no one can ever end the forbearance of the Trump administration. Essentially, legal experts said, Trump is claiming a constitutional power to immunize private parties to commit otherwise illegal acts with impunity. Like, I don't know, let's say deputizing the Proud Boys as ICE agents to beat up brown people and disappear them, if that were the case. Not because he's going to pardon them later on, but because that's not a law. There's no law against it. Not for you guys, there isn't anyway. Don't worry about it. I don't even need to pardon you. You just didn't violate the law. The end. Zachary Price, a professor at the University of California College of the Law at San Francisco, who has written extensively about the limits of executive power not to enforce laws, compared Trump's move with the Obama administration's rules that delayed carrying out certain provisions of his healthcare law to ease the transition. but he portrayed the TikTok move as more extreme. There is a much bigger deal. This is a much bigger deal in that this is just nuking the whole statute instead of tweaking certain provisions, Professor Price said. It's very damaging to the political process. Jack Goldsmith, you know him, Harvard Law School professor, but Harvard, boo, take it apart, and former senior Justice Department official in the Bush administration who has written about the TikTok issue, said Mr. Trump's encroachment on the power of Congress established a precedent that far exceeded actions by other presidents that prompted partisan outcries. Recent past presidents have been aggressive in exercising law enforcement discretion, but they haven't suspended the operation of a law entirely or immunized its violation prospectively, Professor Goldsmith said. He cited an 1838 Supreme Court case involving a law about payments to government contractors that says the Constitution does not give presidents the power to dispense with laws, a power that the British king used to have. A spokesman for the Justice Department declined to comment. Representatives for Apple and Google's parent company, Alphabet, did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Both companies make TikTok available to users on smartphones and other mobile devices in their app stores. TikTok also relies on other companies to operate, including the providers of cloud computing services. Other companies that received Justice Department letters released on Thursday include Akamai, I don't know that one, but Amazon, Digital Realty Trust, I don't know them either, but at least I know I'm pronouncing it correctly, Fastly, LG Electronics USA, Microsoft, Oracle, and T-Mobile. T-Mobile's like, look at us, among the giants. Last year, Congress enacted a law that banned the app in the United States unless its Chinese-owned parent company, ByteDance, sold it to a non-Chinese firm. Supporters of the new law cited concerns that the Chinese government could amass sensitive user data about Americans or use the TikTok algorithm to manipulate public opinion. Oh no, not that. The law says that companies that violate it can face civil fines up to $5,000 per user. A third of Americans say they have used TikTok, according to the Pew Research Center. The Supreme Court unanimously upheld the law in January, and TikTok briefly disappeared from app stores for American users of Apple iPhones or smartphones using the Android operating system, which is run by Google. But on Inauguration Day, Mr. Trump directed the Justice Department not to enforce the TikTok ban for 75 days, to give his administration time to figure out what to do with it. Mr. Trump also directed the Attorney General to send letters to companies stating that there has been no violation of the statute and that there's no liability for any conduct that occurred during the above specified period, as well as for any conduct from the effective date of the act until the issuance of this executive order. He cited no authority for doing so, although he vaguely gestured toward his unique constitutional responsibility for the national security of the United States, the conduct of foreign policy, and other vital executive functions. Neither the Trump administration nor the tech companies had made public the letters sent by Ms. Bondi. In May, the New York Times filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit for the letters. A Silicon Valley software engineer, Tony Tan, also filed a FOIA lawsuit for them in California. Mr. Tan, who received a more extensive set of Ms. Bondi's letters on Thursdays than the Justice Department provided to the Times, has also filed a lawsuit against Alphabet seeking board meeting notes and other corporate records related to its decision to restore TikTok to the Google App Store. In March, several Democratic lawmakers who opposed the TikTok ban told the White House that it was unacceptable for the executive branch to simply ignore the law and tried to enlist the administration's support for legislation that would authorize a delay. On June 29th, Mr. Trump said in an interview that the government had found a buyer for TikTok, and that all done, right? Fix that. But that it still needed to be approved by China's leader, Xi Jinping. The White House had also said in April that it was close to a deal, but apparently that one collapsed after his imposition of tariffs on China. Professor Price warned of the constitutional implications carried by the letters, noting that presidents don't have the power to change the law itself. He added, that's the line that the TikTok order and these letters breach by purporting to legalize conduct that is unlawful by statute, right? And so here there were people who were in Congress opposed to the ban who said, now you don't want to impose the ban either. Let's work together and pass legislation that either delays it or repeals it and gives you a basis from which not to prosecute people. But Trump rejects that and says the basics for not prosecuting them is I say I don't want them prosecuted. Not because I'm delaying their prosecution, not because I'm waiving their prosecution, not because I'm choosing not to bring prosecution, but because there's been no crime here. And there's no crime here because I'm magically waving away the statute. Yeah, that's the issue here. That's how broad the power he claims is. And of course, people will see it as TikTok and therefore not important. Charlie Savage doing us a great service here, carrying this message from these legal experts, trying to get this issue front and center, because it's not always going to be about TikTok. If the president claims and no one stands in the way of his purported power to simply say, that's not even a law, then he could do it for anybody. He's probably already doing it for lots of people, and we just don't know about it. We didn't find out for sure that they were doing it here until there was a FOIA request in May, and then in the end of June, these letters actually show up and acknowledge that this is what's happening. Who knows whether he's doing it for the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers as ICE agents? Who knows whether he's waiving import tariffs, duties, or sanctions against Russian firms for friends who just want to import and or do business with Russian gangsters for whatever reason. Not that you're getting a pardon, which you have to wait for, and his paperwork, and that's burdensome, and sometimes he forgets to sign them, as people found out at the end of his last term. But don't worry about it. You don't even need a pardon from me. There's nothing against the law here, and no future administration can bring charges against you no matter what. Definitely a new ratcheting up of the purported power.
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Okay, we made it. Scattered as it was, we made it the way through our recovery show here on Tuesday. Now, though, for Justice Putnam bringing you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which I believe he has thought through thoroughly. In fact, he begins with, it was a sight to behold, Fox News panicking on live TV over Trump's major failures and trying desperately to flip the script.